The Texas sun blazed mercilessly through my windshield as I navigated the familiar streets of San Antonio, each turn pulling me deeper into a world I'd almost forgotten existed. 18 months in the Syrian desert had recalibrated my definition of normal, and now these manicured suburban lawns felt like props in someone else's movie. Pink balloons bobbed cheerfully from every mailbox on Maple Street, marking the trail to my cousin Maria's baby shower like breadcrumbs leading to my own personal fairy tale nightmare. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, where Aunt Rosa still lived, and killed the engine. The silence that followed felt heavier than the weight of my dress blues hanging in the back seat. Through the living room window, I could see the celebration already in full swing. A sea of pastel decorations and animated faces that looked impossibly bright after months of desert browns and military grays. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the rearview mirror, checking my reflection one last time. The woman staring back at me looked older than her 35 years, with lines etched by sand, stress, and sleepless nights that had nothing to do with crying babies. I tried to soften my appearance for today, traded my combat boots for modest flats, let my hair down from its regulation bun, even applied makeup to cover the faint scar above my left eyebrow from that September incident I wasn't supposed to talk about. The front door opened before I could gather enough courage to walk up the path. Aunt Rosa emerged, her arms already spread wide in that universal gesture of Latino family affection that I'd missed more than I cared to admit. "Mija," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard with the same warmth that had comforted me through countless childhood-scraped knees. "Jennifer, honey, I almost forgot you were still alive. Come, everyone's been asking about you." Her words hit me like friendly fire. "Almost forgot you were still alive." It was meant as a joke, the kind of casual comment that flows naturally in families where distance is measured in missed Sunday dinners rather than classified deployments. But standing there in my civilian clothes, feeling like a stranger in my own skin, those words lodged themselves somewhere deep in my chest. I forced a smile and allowed myself to be swept into Rosa's embrace, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the lingering aroma of homemade tamales. For a moment, I was 8 years old again, seeking comfort in these same arms after another day of feeling different, of not quite fitting in. "How was your deployment?" Rosa asked, stumbling slightly over the military terminology. Her eyes held that particular mixture of pride and worry that I'd grown accustomed to seeing in the faces of military families, the look of people who love you but will never fully understand the world you inhabit. "It was." I started, then stopped. How do you explain 18 months of emergency surgeries under mortar fire to someone whose biggest crisis was running out of salsa at a family gathering? How do you translate the weight of saving lives when your audience measures success in wedding rings and baby announcements? "It was good," I finished lamely. "I'm glad to be home." As we walked toward the house, I caught a glimpse through the window that made my steps falter. There, displayed prominently on the mantelpiece where my high school graduation photo used to sit, was a new family portrait. Everyone was there. Rosa, her husband Carlos, Maria with her glowing pregnancy, even my scattered cousins from Houston and Dallas. Everyone except me. I was the missing piece, the absent family member who'd been airbrushed out of their perfect picture not through malice, but through simple, inevitable irrelevance. The sound of feminine laughter spilled out of the house, mixing with the gentle cumbia music playing from Rosa's ancient stereo system. Through the open door, I could see Maria holding court in the center of the living room, one hand resting protectively on her 8-month belly while the other gestured animatedly as she told some story that had the assembled women hanging on every word. I survived hell, but this felt worse. In Syria, at least I knew who I was. Rosa's hand found mine, giving it a gentle squeeze. Come on, Mija, everyone's excited to see you. Maria's been wondering if you'd make it. She wasn't sure your work would let you come. As we stepped across the threshold, the conversations didn't stop, but they shifted, the way water flows around a stone dropped into a stream. Jennifer. Maria's voice cut through the gentle murmur of female voices, bright and melodious with pregnancy hormones and genuine joy. She struggled to rise from her throne-like position on the couch, surrounded by mountains of gift wrap and baby clothes in every shade of pink imaginable. Her belly, perfectly round beneath a flowing maternity dress, seemed to glow under the soft lighting. The room fell into that particular silence that happens when a family member returns from somewhere they can't quite understand. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed pity. I recognized most of them. Cousins, aunts, family friends who'd watched me grow up as the quiet girl who always seemed out of step. Look at you, Maria beamed, though I caught the slight hesitation as she took in my appearance. Still so, strong-looking. Come here, Prima, let me see you properly. I navigated through the obstacle course of diaper bags and gift boxes, accepting the perfunctory kisses that marked me as family, while somehow emphasizing how separate I felt from this domestic bliss. Maria's embrace was warm but careful, as if she feared I might be too fragile or too dangerous to handle normally. Sit, sit. Aunt Carmen patted the empty chair next to her, conveniently positioned at the edge of the group, close enough to participate but far enough away to avoid disrupting the main conversation. Tell us everything. How was your travels? Travels. That's what they called it when they couldn't say deployment or acknowledge that their niece spent time in places where people died violently. It was educational, I said carefully, settling into my assigned chair. Around me, the women resumed their activities, folding tiny onesies, arranging gift bags, playing shower games that involved measuring Maria's belly with yarn. Still no boyfriend. This came from cousin Isabella, whose own 3 children were terrorizing the backyard. Her question was delivered with casual cruelty that family members specialize in, wrapped in concern but sharp enough to draw blood. No time for that, I replied, forcing lightness into my voice. What I didn't say was that the last man I dated couldn't handle the nightmares, the sudden departures for classified assignments, the way I automatically cataloged exit routes in every restaurant. Jennifer. Aunt Rosa shook her head sadly, as if my single status was a terminal diagnosis. You're 35 now, Mija. The biological clock, it's going tick, tick, tick. You can't wait forever. A chorus of agreement rippled through the room. These women had built their identities around traditional markers of feminine success. To them, my childless, unmarried state wasn't a choice. It was a tragedy, a life half-lived, a cautionary tale about what happens when a woman strays too far from her natural path. Maybe when I retire, I said, though we all knew that military retirement at 35 was either a pipe dream or a sign of career-ending injury. Retire from what, exactly? This question came from Maria's mother-in-law, a sharp-eyed woman named Dolores who'd never approved of the family's vagueness about my profession. What is it you do again? Something with the government. The room grew quiet, waiting for my answer. I could feel their collective curiosity like a weight on my shoulders. They knew I was military. The short hair and posture made that obvious, but the details remained carefully classified. I'm a doctor, I said finally. I work in emergency medicine. It wasn't technically a lie. I was a trauma surgeon, board certified and licensed. The fact that my operating rooms were usually located in combat zones was simply additional context. Oh, how wonderful. Dolores clapped her hands. A doctor, but why aren't you married? Doctors make excellent husbands. Surely you meet eligible men at the hospital. Before I could explain the limited dating pool at forward operating bases, Maria saved me by releasing a small gasp and placing both hands on her belly. Oh, he's kicking, she announced, and instantly, every woman abandoned their previous interests to focus on the miracle of prenatal movement. Jennifer, come feel this. You're medical, you'll appreciate it. I dutifully placed my hand on Maria's stomach, feeling the strong, rhythmic movements of new life. Around us, the women cooed and offered predictions about the baby's personality. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to carry life instead of constantly fighting to preserve it. You'll understand someday, Maria said softly, covering my hand with hers. When you have your own. The casual certainty in her voice, that maternal fulfillment was inevitable, just delayed, settled over me like a familiar weight I'd learned to carry. But as the baby kicked against my palm one more time, I found myself transported to a different moment, a different pair of hands covering mine. Calloused fingers, scarred from years of military service, guiding my small child's hand as we stood in our backyard in San Antonio, staring up at the vast Texas sky. Mija, my father's voice echoed across 27 years, as clear as if he were standing beside me now. You see all those stars up there? I was 8 years old, still young enough to believe that my daddy could fix anything. He just returned from Desert Storm, though I wouldn't understand the significance until much later. All I knew was that he'd been gone for months, and now he was home, and the world felt safe again. Some people are born to different kinds of families, Jennifer. He'd said that night, his weathered face serious in the moonlight. Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez had survived 2 tours in Vietnam and understood sacrifice in ways that most fathers never would. Some families are the ones you're born into. Others are the ones you choose when duty calls. I remembered pressing closer to his side, inhaling the familiar scent of Old Spice and military-issue soap that never quite washed away. But Daddy, don't you want to stay with us forever? His laugh had been gentle, but tinged with melancholy. Of course I do, Bibita, but sometimes love means protecting what matters most, even when it means being far away. Some people are called to serve, and that's service. It's not just a job, it's who you are. He'd crouched down then, bringing his face level with mine, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. Promise me something, Mija. Whatever path you choose in life, make sure it's one that honors who you are inside. Don't let anyone make you small just because they can't understand you're big. At 8, I'd nodded solemnly, not fully comprehending the weight of what he was asking. The last conversation we'd had was different. I was 28, about to enter my surgical residency. The Army had paid for my education, and my commitment was about to begin. Dad was dying, cancer, the kind that comes from too many years of exposure to classified chemicals. I'm proud of you, soldier, he'd whispered from his hospital bed, his voice barely audible above the steady beep of machines. You chose the hard path, the one that matters. Daddy, I could stay, I could practice medicine here, take care of you. No, his grip on my hand was surprisingly strong. You make your old man proud out there. You save lives, Jennifer. You carry on what we started. He died while I was in Afghanistan during my first deployment. I'd been elbow deep in surgery, working to save a 19-year-old Marine who'd stepped on an IED when the chaplain found me. The Red Cross message was brief. Dad was gone, funeral in 3 days. I'd finished the surgery first. The Marine lived, went home to his own father. I'd attended my dad's funeral via video call from Kandahar, watching through a pixelated screen as they folded the flag and handed it to my mother. That night, alone in my cramped quarters, I'd made a promise to the empty air. "I'll make you proud, Daddy. I'll be the soldier you raised me to be." 11 years later, I'd kept that promise through 3 deployments, countless surgeries, and more close calls than I cared to count. I'd saved lives in places where death arrived daily, earned the respect of my peers and the gratitude of patients whose faces I'd never see again. But sitting in Maria's living room, surrounded by the warm chaos of family life I'd never known, I wondered if he'd also understood the cost of the path he'd set me on. The loneliness. The way civilian relationships felt like speaking different languages. "Jennifer," Maria's voice pulled me back to the present. "Are you okay? You look like you went somewhere else for a minute." I blinked, realizing that my hand was still resting on her belly, and that several of the women were looking at me with expressions of concern mixed with curiosity. "Sorry," I said, pulling my hand away. "Just thinking about my dad, he would have loved to see this." The words hung in the air, carrying more weight than anyone in the room could possibly understand. Rosa's expression softened with sympathy, but I could see the familiar confusion lurking behind her eyes, the same look that crossed every civilian face when military families spoke about their sacrifices. They heard the words but couldn't translate the language of loss that came with the uniform. "He was so proud of you, Mija," she said gently. "Always talking about his daughter, the doctor." Doctor. The word felt both accurate and impossibly incomplete, like calling the ocean wet. If only they knew what kind of medicine I practiced, what kind of patients filled my days. But how do you explain that your operating room was a converted shipping container in the Syrian desert, that your colleagues were Marines and Army medics who could perform emergency surgery while incoming mortars shook dust from the ceiling? The memory pulled me back without warning, the way trauma always does. Sudden, visceral, inescapable. September heat in Sector 7, the kind that made your uniform stick to your skin before you'd even finished your morning coffee. Our forward operating base sat like a concrete island in an ocean of sand and hostility, housing 200 American service members and a MASH unit that had become my second home. As chief medical officer, I ran an operation that would have impressed any stateside trauma center, except our emergency room was surrounded by sandbags, and our patient transport involved helicopters dodging rocket fire. I'd been there 8 months by then, long enough to recognize the different sounds of incoming ordnance, to perform surgery by the light of emergency generators when the power grid took a hit. Long enough to stop flinching when the alarm sirens wailed at 3 in the morning, summoning us to receive casualties from another convoy ambush or IED strike. My team called me Major Miracle, not because I was particularly gifted, but because I refused to accept that anyone was beyond saving. In those 18 months, we'd processed over 3,000 casualties. Some arrived walking, others didn't. Some went home to their families, others went home in flag-draped coffins. But every single one of them received the same thing from me, everything I had. The work was relentless. 12-hour shifts became 14, then 16, then however long it took to stabilize the wounded. I'd performed emergency surgery in the back of moving vehicles, delivered babies during sandstorms, and once spent 36 hours straight treating victims of a chemical attack on a nearby village. My hands had been inside more human bodies than I cared to count, feeling for bleeding arteries in the dark, coaxing damaged hearts back to rhythm, reconstructing faces that explosions had torn apart. But the hardest part wasn't the gore or the exhaustion or even the constant threat of death. It was the isolation, the way military service created a glass wall between you and everyone who'd never lived it. When I called home from Syria, which was rare given the time difference and security restrictions. The conversations felt like speaking across an impossible gulf. "How's the weather?" Mom would ask, as if I was vacationing somewhere exotic rather than living in a war zone. "Hot," I'd answer, not mentioning that hot meant 120 degrees in the shade, or that the last sandstorm had lasted 4 days, or that we'd lost 2 medics the previous week when their convoy hit a roadside bomb. "Are you eating enough? You look thin on the video calls." I'd nod and make appropriate responses while standing in a medical tent where the smell of disinfectant couldn't quite mask the underlying odors of blood and fear. "How do you explain that you're losing weight because sometimes there isn't time to eat when the wounded keep arriving? That you've learned to function on military MREs and instant coffee because sitting down for a real meal feels like a luxury you can't afford when people are dying?" They meant well, these calls home, but each one reinforced how completely separate my 2 worlds had become. Here, I was essential, the person who stood between life and death, who made split-second decisions that determined whether a 19-year-old from Nebraska would walk again or a 22-year-old from Detroit would ever see his daughter. But to my family, I was still just Jennifer who was somewhere overseas, doing something medical, living a life they couldn't picture and didn't want to understand. The worst part was coming home on leave and trying to readjust to a world where the biggest emergency was running out of milk, where people complained about traffic, while I was still programming myself not to scan for snipers on rooftops. I'd sit through family dinners listening to cousin drama and work gossip, all while carrying images of things that would give normal people nightmares for years. But I'd made a promise to my father, and I'd kept it. For 18 months in Syria, I'd been exactly the soldier he'd raised me to be, dedicated, competent, unflinching in the face of horror. I'd saved lives that mattered, had earned the respect of colleagues who understood the weight of what we carried together. "Jennifer," Maria's voice cut through the memory like a scalpel. "You're doing it again, going somewhere else." I blinked, suddenly aware that I'd been staring at my hands, seeing blood that was no longer there, feeling the phantom weight of surgical instruments I wasn't holding. The baby shower swirled back into focus around me, all pink decorations and gentle laughter, a world away from the desert where I'd left pieces of myself. "Sorry," I said again, though the word felt inadequate. Sometimes the mind wanders. But even as I smiled and rejoined the conversation about nursery themes and feeding schedules, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still wandering, lost somewhere between the person I'd become in the desert and the one my family expected me to be. The mind does more than wander when you've lived through what I had. Sometimes it drags you back without warning, without permission, to moments that changed everything. And September 15th was one of those moments that refused to stay buried. It had started like any other morning in Sector 7. Coffee that tasted like burnt motor oil, briefings about convoy routes and weather patterns, the familiar weight of my sidearm against my hip as I made rounds through the medical tents. By 0800 hours, we'd already processed 6 casualties from an overnight patrol, nothing unusual for a Tuesday in Syria. I was in Trauma Bay too, suturing a shrapnel wound on a 20-year-old corpsman from Kansas when the first rocket hit. The explosion wasn't loud so much as it was felt, a massive concussive wave that rattled every piece of equipment in the MASH unit and sent dust cascading from the ceiling like deadly snow. The lights flickered once, twice, then died as the emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in the hellish red glow of backup power. "Incoming!" Someone shouted, though we all knew that already. The alarm klaxons were wailing, adding their mechanical screams to the very human ones that had started coming from outside. Then the second rocket hit, and the third. What followed was 12 hours of hell that I still couldn't fully process, even 18 months later. The initial barrage had taken out our main communications array and damaged the helicopter landing pad, which meant we were cut off from medevac support just as we needed it most. Bodies started arriving faster than we could process them. Marines from the forward positions, Army engineers caught in the crossfire, even local civilians who'd been in the wrong place when the mortars started falling. I remember moving through those hours like I was underwater, everything muffled and dreamlike except for the brilliant clarity that came with extreme crisis. My hands never stopped moving, cutting, suturing, injecting, commanding. We converted the mess hall into an auxiliary surgical suite, used the chapel as a recovery ward, turned anywhere with 4 walls and a roof into a place where we could fight death. Major Martinez, we need you in Bay 4 stat. Blood supplies running low in Bay 2. What's our resupply status? Doctor, this Marine's not breathing. The voices blended together into a symphony of desperation that I conducted with surgical precision. I was everywhere at once, making triage decisions that would haunt me forever. Who lived? Who died? Who got the last unit of O-negative blood? During those 12 hours, I performed surgery while artillery shells exploded close enough to shake my instruments. I delivered a baby in a supply closet while small arms fire rattled the walls. I held the hand of a 19-year-old from Texas as he died, whispering lies about how everything would be okay. By the time the attack ended and relief finally arrived, we had treated 237 casualties. 211 of them lived. 26 didn't make it, including 2 of my own medics who'd been caught in the initial barrage. But the number that mattered most, the one that would eventually earn me a phone call from the Pentagon and a ceremony I'd never expected, was 211. 211 human beings who went home to their families because we refused to give up, because we turned a bombed-out medical facility into a miracle factory staffed by people who were too stubborn to let death win. I'd worked for 36 hours straight during that siege, catching 20-minute naps between surgeries, surviving on adrenaline and the knowledge that stopping meant people died. When it was over, when the last casualty had been stabilized, and the medevac birds finally arrived to transport the worst cases to Germany, I'd collapsed in my quarters and slept for 14 hours. I woke up to find that someone had nominated me for the Medal of Valor, the highest award for non-combat heroism that the military could bestow. The citation would eventually read, "Conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in the face of grave danger," but those words felt hollow compared to the reality of what had happened. I hadn't been gallant or intrepid. I'd just been a doctor doing what doctors do, except under circumstances that would have broken most people. But that day had changed me in ways I was still discovering. It had proven that I could function under the worst possible pressure, that my father's faith in me hadn't been misplaced. It had also left me with a profound understanding of what truly mattered and what didn't. Sitting in Maria's living room, listening to debates about whether the nursery should be painted baby blue or sage green, I felt that familiar disconnection creeping in. These people, my family, were worried about thread counts and diaper brands while I carried memories of trying to save a Marine's life with nothing but gauze and determination. They weren't wrong to care about these things, but I wasn't wrong to find them impossibly small compared to what I'd seen, what I'd done, what I'd survived. "Jennifer, what do you think?" Maria's voice cut through the memory like a scalpel. Pink or yellow for the baby blanket. I looked at the 2 swatches of fabric she was holding up, each one soft and perfect and utterly meaningless in the context of where my mind had just been. "Both are beautiful," I said, and meant it. Whatever makes you happy. But the words felt like they were coming from underwater, muffled by the weight of everything I couldn't say. That's when I noticed him watching me from across the room. Miguel, Maria's husband, leaning against the doorway with a beer in his hand and recognition in his eyes. Unlike the women who saw my distant expression as rudeness, Miguel was reading something else entirely. His gaze held the particular intensity of someone who'd seen that same look in his own mirror. He was a big man, broad-shouldered with graying temples and lines around his eyes that came from squinting into foreign suns. I knew from family gossip that he'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Marines before coming home to work construction, but we'd never really talked about it. "Jennifer," he said quietly, approaching with careful movements. "Want to step outside for a minute? Get some air?" It wasn't really a question, and I was grateful for that. I nodded and followed him through the sliding glass door onto the back patio, where the Texas heat felt cleaner than the perfumed air inside. Miguel handed me his untouched beer and opened another for himself. We stood in comfortable silence, watching his kids play on the swing set while baby shower sounds drifted through the windows behind us. "How long you been back?" he asked finally. 3 weeks. He nodded, taking a long pull from his beer. "That explains it." "Explains what?" "The way you keep checking the exits, the way you flinch when someone drops something, the way you're sitting in there listening to them talk about baby clothes while your mind's somewhere else entirely." He looked at me directly. "I know that look, Hermana. Hell, I wore it for about 2 years after I got back. The word Hermana, sister, hit me harder than it should have. In all my years of service, I'd found brotherhood with fellow medical officers and the troops we treated, but family had never understood that bond." "It's that obvious?" I asked. "To them." Miguel gestured toward the house. "Nah, they just think you're being antisocial, but to someone who's been there, yeah, it's written all over you." I felt something loosen in my chest. "Syria," I said simply. "Figured medical. Chief Medical Officer, Forward Operating Base Samarra, 18 months. Miguel whistled low. Samarra heard that was a hot zone. Getting hotter every day. The words came easier than expected. We were running a MASH unit, treating everything from convoy casualties to civilian injuries. "How many did you lose?" It was a question only another veteran would ask, direct, honest, without civilian dancing around suspected trauma. 26 during the worst attack, but we saved 211. The numbers came out automatically, burned into my memory like a prayer I couldn't stop reciting. Miguel was quiet for a long moment. "That's a hell of a ratio, you should be proud." "I am most days." I took a sip of beer. "It's just coming back to this." I gestured toward the house. "They want to know why I'm not married, why I don't have kids, why I can't just settle down and be normal, and I can't explain that normal feels." "Small," Miguel finished. "Like you're suffocating in someone else's life." "Exactly." "Yeah, I get it. Took me about 3 years to stop feeling like I was watching my own life through bulletproof glass. Everything here felt so fragile." We stood in silence again, watching the kids play, listening to the distant sounds of the baby shower continuing without us. For the first time since I'd walked into that house, I felt like I could breathe properly. "Does it get easier?" I asked. Miguel considered this carefully. "Different," he said finally. "Not easier, just different. You learn to translate between worlds, to appreciate what they care about without losing what you know matters." He looked at me meaningfully. "Good thing you're not doing it alone anymore." The words settled over me like a promise, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than isolation creeping in at the edges. But promises, I'd learned, had a way of being tested almost immediately. We'd barely finished our beers when the sliding door opened behind us, and Aunt Rosa stepped onto the patio with that particular expression that meant trouble was coming. She wasn't alone. My mother emerged right behind her, followed by cousin Isabella and 2 other women. They moved with the coordinated purpose of people who'd been planning this conversation. "Mija," Rosa began, her voice carrying that tone of gentle authority that had been terrifying me since childhood. "We need to talk." Miguel caught my eye and gave the slightest nod before retreating through the door, leaving me alone with the tribunal. "Sit down, Jennifer." My mother, Carmen, indicated one of the patio chairs. "We're worried about you." The familiar weight of family concern settled over me like a blanket I couldn't shake off. I remained standing, which earned me disapproving looks. "There's nothing to worry about," I said carefully. "I'm fine. Fine." Isabella laughed without humor. "Jennifer, you've been home for 3 weeks and this is the first time we've seen you. You sit in corners, you don't talk to anyone, and when we ask about your life, you give us one-word answers." "She's right, Mija." Rosa's voice was gentler but no less insistent. "You're 35 years old, you have no husband, no children, no roots anywhere. You disappear for months to God knows where, and when you come back, you're like a stranger." My mother stepped forward, hands clasped in her preparing-for-battle stance. "We've been talking, and we think it's time for you to make some changes, real changes." "What kind of changes?" "You need to leave the military," Carmen said without preamble. "This career isn't working for you. Look at yourself, Jennifer. You're wasting your life." The words hit like physical blows. "Wasting my life?" "Yes." Rosa's voice rose with maternal frustration. "You're a doctor, for heaven's sake. You could work anywhere, Houston, San Antonio, Dallas. You could have a real practice, real patients, a real life. You could meet someone, settle down, give us grandchildren." Instead, Isabella added with casual family cruelty, "You're playing soldier in places that don't want us there, fixing people who will probably just get hurt again, living like a nun in the desert." Playing soldier. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation, stripping away 18 months of surgical precision under enemy fire, reducing 211 saved lives to a childish game. "You don't understand what I do," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "Then explain it to us." My mother's composure cracked. "Because all we see is our daughter throwing away her life for strangers, while your real family sits here wondering if you're alive or dead." The accusations came faster now, each woman taking turns expressing disappointments and fears about my choices. They painted my life as unrecognizable to me, selfish, meaningless, a waste of potential that hurt everyone who loved me. "We're not asking you to change overnight," Carmen said, softening her tone. "But you need to think about your future. Family matters, Jennifer. Love matters. Having someone to take care of you when you're old, that matters. And what happens when you're too old or too broken for this military thing?" Isabella added, "Who's going to be there for you then?" Their words were designed to wound, taking every insecurity I'd ever had about my choices and weaponizing them with surgical family precision. But underneath their criticism, I could hear genuine fear. These women loved me in the only way they knew how, and my choices were incomprehensible to them. "I know you mean well," I said finally, "but this is my life. These are my choices." "Choices that are wrong for you," Rosa insisted. "Choices that are making you miserable. Then why do you look like you're carrying the weight of the world?" Carmen asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why can't you just be happy, Mija?" The question hung heavy with years of misunderstanding. How could I explain that happiness wasn't the point, that purpose was more important than comfort? "I can't be someone I'm not," I said quietly. "Not even for you." The disappointment on their faces was almost unbearable, but I held my ground. Behind them, through the sliding glass door, I could see Miguel watching, his presence somehow steadying. I had survived enemy fire and life and death decisions. I could survive this too, but surviving and thriving were two different things, and as we filed back into the house, I felt the weight of their judgment settling over me like a shroud. The conversation on the patio had shifted something fundamental. Where before I'd been the pitied spinster cousin, now I was the stubborn problem that needed solving. The baby shower resumed with forced cheerfulness, but I could feel the undercurrent of whispered conversations and meaningful glances. Isabella had appointed herself as family spokesperson, making pointed comments about people who think they're too good for normal life and women who put careers before family. I retreated to my corner chair, nursing a glass of punch that tasted like artificial cherry and regret. The gift opening ceremony had begun, and Maria was holding court again, exclaiming over each tiny onesie with the kind of joy that seemed to illuminate the entire room. Watching her, I felt the familiar pang of something I couldn't quite name. Not envy, exactly, but recognition of a path not taken. Look at this one. Maria held up a pale yellow sleeper decorated with tiny elephants. Isn't it precious? The assembled women cooed appreciatively, offering predictions about the baby's personality. I smiled and made appropriate noises, but felt increasingly like an observer at someone else's life. That's when Maria's expression changed. She was reaching for another gift when her face suddenly scrunched with concentration, then shifted to concern. "Oh," she said quietly, one hand moving to her lower back. "What is it, Mija?" Rosa was at her side instantly. "I don't know, just a strange feeling." Maria shifted uncomfortably, then winced. Like a cramp, but different. Every woman in the room went silent. I felt my medical training kick in, pushing aside emotional turmoil and focusing on what I was seeing. A woman at 36 weeks gestation experiencing discomfort that was making her pause. "Maria," I said, my voice shifting into the calm, professional tone I used in trauma situations. "Can you describe the feeling? Is it constant or does it come and go?" She looked at me with relief. Finally, someone asking the right questions. "It comes and goes. Started about 10 minutes ago. It's like my whole belly gets tight, then releases." "How far apart?" "Maybe every 5 minutes, oh." She doubled over slightly as another wave hit. That one was stronger. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Rosa started barking orders about calling doctors. Isabella began pacing. My mother gathered purses and car keys with practiced efficiency. But in the center of all that activity, I found myself in my element for the first time all day. This was familiar territory, a medical situation requiring clear thinking and decisive action. The family drama faded as I focused on what mattered, ensuring the safety of both mother and baby. "Everyone needs to stay calm," I said, my voice cutting through rising panic. "Maria, I need you to time the next contraction for me." For the next 20 minutes, I guided the room through a controlled assessment. I had her walk around to see if movement affected the contractions, monitored their intensity and frequency, asked the questions that helped determine whether this was false labor or the real thing. But as I watched Maria work through another contraction, gripping Miguel's hand while her face contorted with pain and concentration, I felt something breaking inside me. Here was the moment that defined womanhood in my family's eyes, the ultimate expression of feminine purpose. And I was watching from the outside, useful only as a medical professional, never as a participant. "We should get to the hospital," I said finally. "This could be early labor, and with a first baby, it's better to be safe." As the room mobilized around getting Maria to the car, I found myself standing alone in the sudden quiet, surrounded by abandoned gift wrap and half-eaten cake. The contrast was stark. Moments ago, I'd been the family disappointment. Now I was the expert they turned to in crisis. But the expertise came with a price. It emphasized just how separate I was from the experience I was managing. I could deliver babies, but I'd never carry one. I could guide women through labor, but I'd never feel those contractions myself. Standing in that empty room, listening to car doors slamming and engines starting, I felt more alone than I had in months. Even Miguel's earlier promise of solidarity seemed distant now, overwhelmed by his wife's immediate needs. For the first time since coming home, I wondered if my family was right. Maybe I was wasting my life. Maybe playing soldier in foreign deserts was just an elaborate way of avoiding the real business of being a woman. The house fell silent, except for the ticking of Rosa's grandfather clock and the distant sound of my own doubt echoing in the empty rooms. I was standing in that suffocating quiet when the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and unexpected. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, probably another neighbor wanting to know about the commotion. But the doorbell rang again, followed by a firm, authoritative knock that carried the unmistakable rhythm of military purpose. 3 short raps, pause, 2 more. I knew that cadence. Through the frosted glass panels, I could make out the silhouette of a tall figure in what looked like a formal uniform. The shape was too rigid, too official for a casual visitor. I opened the door to find a young Air Force Staff sergeant standing at attention, his dress blues immaculate despite the Texas heat. He was maybe 25, with military bearing that spoke of ceremonial duty. In his white-gloved hands, he held a manila envelope bearing official seals I recognized from my own service. Major Jennifer Martinez. His voice carried the formal tone reserved for official business. Yes, the word came out hoarse. Staff Sergeant Williams, United States Air Force Ceremonial Honor Guard. He executed a perfect salute, which I returned automatically. I have a delivery for you, ma'am, from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. My mind reeled. Official deliveries to home addresses were rare, usually reserved for the most serious matters, notifications of death, courts martial, or ceremonies of the highest importance. What kind of delivery? I'm instructed to deliver this package directly to you, ma'am, and to ensure you understand its significance. He extended the envelope with both hands. This contains notification of a presidential citation for extraordinary service to the United States of America. The words didn't compute. Presidential citation. I stared at the envelope, seeing the official seals and watermarks, but unable to process what it might contain. I think there's been a mistake, I said slowly. I haven't been nominated for any citations. No mistake, ma'am. Sergeant Williams remained professionally neutral, but I caught a flicker of pride. The citation was processed through classified channels and has been approved at the highest levels. Behind him, I noticed a small crowd gathering. Rosa's neighbors were emerging from their houses, drawn by the sight of a military honor guard on their quiet suburban street. Mrs. Patterson from next door was openly staring, her garden hose forgotten. Ma'am, Sergeant Williams continued, would you prefer to receive this presentation privately, or may I proceed with the standard ceremonial protocol? Ceremonial protocol meant a formal presentation, complete with citation reading and military pageantry that drew attention from blocks away. The fact that it was happening here, now, in the aftermath of the worst family confrontation of my adult life, felt like either cosmic justice or cruel irony. Here is fine, I heard myself say. Sergeant Williams nodded and took a step back, creating formal distance. He opened the manila envelope with practiced precision, removing a bound document and what appeared to be a metal case wrapped in tissue paper. Major Jennifer Martinez, he began, his voice carrying clearly across Rosa's front yard and drawing more neighbors from their houses. By order of the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense, you are hereby awarded the Medal of Valor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. The words washed over me like a wave. Medal of Valor, the highest award for non-combat heroism that the military could bestow. The citation reads, Sergeant Williams continued, for exceptional heroism during enemy action on September 15th in the Syrian Theater of Operations, when Major Martinez, serving as Chief Medical Officer, led the successful evacuation and treatment of 211 casualties under direct enemy fire for a continuous period of 12 hours, without regard for her own safety, and in the finest traditions of military service. The words hung in the air, each one landing with the weight of truth. September 15th. The day that had changed everything, the day I'd thought about constantly, but had never spoken of outside my unit. As Sergeant Williams continued reading the citation, detailing acts of heroism I barely remembered performing, I felt something shifting inside me. The doubt that had been eating at me since the confrontation with my family began to crack, replaced by something harder and more certain. I wasn't playing soldier. I was a soldier, and apparently I was a decorated one. The crowd of neighbors had grown larger, forming a respectful semicircle around Rosa's front porch. I could see cell phones emerging, capturing this moment that felt surreal even as I lived it. But my attention was focused entirely on Sergeant Williams as he carefully removed the medal from its case. The Medal of Valor gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, bronze and silver, suspended from a ribbon of deep blue with thin stripes of red and white. It was heavier than I'd expected when he placed it in my palm, substantial in a way that spoke to the gravity of what it represented. Major Martinez, Sergeant Williams said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, this medal is awarded in recognition of your actions during the siege of Forward Operating Base Samarra, where your leadership and medical expertise under extreme duress saved the lives of American service members and Allied personnel. That's when I heard the cars pulling up behind the crowd. Multiple vehicles, doors slamming, urgent voices. My family was back from the hospital, and they were walking into something they could never have imagined. Rosa appeared first, still wearing her pink baby shower dress but looking disheveled from the hospital rush. She stopped dead when she saw the military ceremony taking place on her front lawn, her mouth falling open in shock. Behind her came my mother, Carmen, followed by Isabella and the other women, all of them staring at the scene with expressions of complete bewilderment. Jennifer. Rosa's voice was barely above a whisper. What's happening? Sergeant Williams had noticed the arrivals but continued with military precision. The specific citation notes that Major Martinez established and maintained field surgical operations for 12 consecutive hours while under direct enemy fire, coordinating the treatment and evacuation of critically wounded personnel with complete disregard for her own safety. My mother pushed through the crowd of neighbors, her face a mixture of confusion and something that might have been fear. Jennifer, who is this? What's going on? I looked at my family, these women who had spent the afternoon telling me I was wasting my life, that I was avoiding my real responsibilities as a woman. They stood there in their pastel party dresses, clutching purses and leftover baby gifts, looking like visitors from another planet as they tried to process what they were witnessing. This is Staff Sergeant Williams, I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. He's delivering an award from the Department of Defense. An award? Isabella stepped forward, her earlier condescension replaced by obvious confusion. What kind of award? Sergeant Williams answered for me, his ceremonial training taking over. The Medal of Valor, ma'am. It's the highest decoration for non-combat heroism that can be awarded by the United States military. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything they'd said to me that afternoon. I watched their faces as they processed this information, seeing the slow dawning recognition that they had been fundamentally wrong about who I was and what I did. During the actions described in this citation, Williams continued, reading from the official document. Major Martinez personally treated over 50 critical casualties, performed emergency surgery in a bunker under artillery bombardment, and coordinated the successful medical evacuation of all surviving personnel. Her actions directly resulted in the preservation of American lives and exemplified the highest traditions of military service. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Carmen looked like she might faint. Isabella just stared, her earlier certainty completely shattered. The President of the United States, Williams concluded, has asked me to convey his personal gratitude for Major Martinez's distinguished service and to express the nation's appreciation for her sacrifice and dedication. The silence that followed was profound. Even the neighbors had stopped murmuring, sensing the gravity of what had just been revealed. I stood there holding my medal, looking at my family's shocked faces, feeling the weight of vindication settling over me like armor. "Ma'am," Sergeant Williams said quietly, stepping closer. "There's one more component to this presentation. I have authorization for a secure video call with the Pentagon if you're willing to receive it." I nodded, not trusting my voice. He produced a military-grade tablet from his ceremonial bag and set up a secure connection with practiced efficiency. Within moments, the screen flickered to life, revealing a familiar face, General Patricia Hayes, my former commanding officer and the woman who had recommended me for this citation. "Major Martinez," General Hayes' voice came through the tablet's speakers, clear and warm. "It's an honor to see you receive this recognition. Your actions on September 15th were nothing short of extraordinary, and it's about time the world knew what kind of soldier you really are." My family crowded closer, trying to see the screen, their faces still registering shock and disbelief. For them, this was like discovering that their quiet daughter was actually a superhero. "Thank you, General," I managed to say. "I was just doing my job." "No," General Hayes replied firmly. "You were doing much more than that. You were saving lives under impossible circumstances, showing the kind of courage and skill that defines the very best of our military. The soldiers you saved that day, they are home with their families because of you." As the call ended and Sergeant Williams began packing up his equipment, I looked at my family again. The women who had spent the afternoon questioning my choices, pitying my unmarried state, demanding that I abandon my career for a more conventional life. They were looking at me like they'd never seen me before, and maybe, for the first time, they actually had. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that couldn't be unsaid. Rosa's neighbors remained gathered on the lawn, as if they understood they'd witnessed something significant. It was my mother who moved first. Carmen stepped forward slowly, her earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like fear, not of me but of how wrong she'd been. "Jennifer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't know. You never asked," I replied, my voice steady but not unkind. "You assumed." Rosa was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at the medal in my hands. 211 people, she managed to say. "You saved 211 people." "I was part of a team," I said automatically. "I couldn't have done it alone." "But you led them," Isabella said suddenly, her voice strange and hollow. The woman who had called my service, playing soldier, just hours earlier was struggling to reconcile her dismissive words with reality. Sergeant Williams approached me one final time. "Major Martinez, there's one more thing. I have letters here from some of the soldiers whose lives you saved. They asked me to deliver them personally." He handed me a small bundle of envelopes, each one addressed in different handwriting. I could see that some were written on military letterhead, others on personal stationery. One appeared to be in a child's handwriting with a crayon drawing attached. "Thank you, Sergeant," I said, accepting the letters with hands that weren't quite steady. After his final salute and departure, my family remained frozen in place, looking at me like I was a stranger who happened to share their DNA. "How long?" Rosa asked finally. "How long have you been this person?" "I've always been this person," I said quietly. "You just saw what you wanted to see." Miguel's truck pulled into the driveway at that moment. "False alarm," he called out as he approached. "Just Braxton Hicks contractions. Maria and the baby are fine." He stopped when he noticed the tension and the medal in my hand. "What happened here?" "Jennifer received a medal," Carmen said, her voice hollow. "From the president." Miguel looked at me with something that might have been pride. "The Medal of Valor." When I nodded, he extended his hand for a firm handshake. "Congratulations, Major. That's the highest honor they can give for what you do." The simple acknowledgement from someone who understood military service hit me harder than all the official ceremonies. "Read one," Rosa said suddenly, pointing to the letters. "Please read one of them." I selected an envelope at random and carefully opened it. The letter was written on hospital letterhead, the handwriting shaky but legible. "Dear Major Martinez," I read aloud. "My name is Corporal David Chen. I was one of the Marines you treated on September 15th. I had shrapnel in my chest and leg, and the medics said I probably wouldn't make it. But you didn't give up on me. You worked on me for 3 hours, and when I woke up in Germany, they told me you'd saved my life." I paused, feeling the weight of the words. "I wanted you to know that I made it home. I married my girlfriend Sarah last month, and we're expecting our first baby in December. Every day I wake up is because of what you did for me. You didn't just save a soldier. You saved a husband, a future father, a son whose parents get to see him grow old. You are a hero, Major Martinez. Don't let anyone tell you different. Respectfully, Corporal David Chen Uzmk." When I finished reading, the silence was absolute. Rosa was openly sobbing now, and even Isabella was wiping tears from her eyes. My mother stepped forward then, her earlier judgment replaced by awe. "Can you forgive us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Can you forgive us for being so blind?" I looked at this woman who had raised me, worried about me even if she'd never understood me. The anger I'd carried began to shift into something softer. "You can start by seeing me," I said simply. "Really seeing me for who I am, not who you think I should be." The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across Rosa's yard, painting everything in golden light. Standing there with my medal and my letters, surrounded by family who were finally beginning to understand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt like I was home. 6 months later, I found myself back in Rosa's kitchen, but everything had changed. The family portrait on the mantelpiece now included me, not the old high school graduation photo, but a new one taken at the medal ceremony, showing me in my dress blues with the Medal of Valor gleaming on my chest. Beside it sat a smaller frame containing Corporal Chen's letter, the one Rosa had insisted on framing. "Tia Jennifer." The voice belonged to little Miguel Jr., Rosa's grandson, who came running into the kitchen wearing a toy military helmet and carrying a plastic stethoscope. "Play doctor with me." I smiled, kneeling down to his level. "What seems to be the problem, soldier?" As I performed an elaborate surgery on his teddy bear, using my real medical knowledge to explain what I was doing, I caught sight of Rosa watching from the doorway. The woman who had once begged me to leave the military was now the proud owner of military medical textbooks, determined to understand her niece's world. The changes in my family had been gradual but profound. Carmen had started volunteering at the local VA hospital. Isabella had organized a fundraiser for military families. Even the cousins who'd barely acknowledged me before now introduced me as our hero to their friends. But the most meaningful change had come from an unexpected source. Maria's baby, born healthy 2 weeks after the medal ceremony, had been named Jennifer Carmen Rodriguez, Jenny for short. When Maria had told me, tears streaming down her face, she'd said something I'd never forget. I want my daughter to grow up knowing that there are many ways to serve, many ways to be strong. That afternoon, as I was getting ready to return to my new assignment, a teaching position at the military medical college, Jenny started crying in her crib. Without thinking, I picked her up, and she immediately settled against my shoulder, her tiny fist gripping my finger with surprising strength. "She knows," Maria said softly. "She knows she's safe with you." As I held my namesake, feeling the weight of new life in my arms, I realized that my family had been right about one thing. I was meant to nurture life. I just did it differently than they'd imagined. Every soldier I'd saved, every life I'd preserved, every young medic I would train, they were all part of my legacy, my contribution to the future. The Medal of Valor now hung in my new quarters, but it shared space with something equally precious. A photo of Jenny taking her first steps, reaching for me with chubby toddler arms. My mother had sent it with a note that simply read, "She wants to be just like her tia Jennifer." That evening, I sat down to write my own letter, not to headquarters, but to the young women who might be struggling with the same questions I'd faced. Women who were being told that service and sacrifice weren't feminine enough, that choosing duty over convention meant choosing loneliness over love. I wanted them to know that heroism doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it whispers in surgical suites at 3 in the morning, in steady hands that refuse to quit when others would break. Sometimes it lives in the choice to serve something greater than yourself, even when the people you love most can't understand why. The path of service isn't always easy, and it's not for everyone. But for those called to walk it, know that you're not walking alone. There are families waiting to be chosen, brothers and sisters in arms who will understand your heart even when your blood relatives cannot. My medal doesn't make me special. It makes me responsible. Responsible to continue serving, to keep saving lives, to show young women that strength comes in many forms and heroism wears many faces. Your story matters too. Whether you're serving in uniform, saving lives in hospitals, teaching children, or fighting battles that no one else can see, your courage has value. Your choices have meaning. Your voice deserves to be heard. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own moments of finding strength when others doubted you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you'd like to hear more stories about everyday heroes who refuse to give up, please subscribe to honor Vindicated. Remember, you're not alone in whatever arena you're fighting in. Keep standing, keep serving, keep being exactly who you were meant to be. Until next time, may you find the courage to write your own definition of heroism, and may those who love you learn to read it.